right, and it was still fun. But this year it's going to be in Athens at the Freshwater Fish Hatchery Center. It's not that far away, so there's no reason not to go. And it is really fun. It's $50 a person. You can register online. If you're having trouble registering online, please see me or Holly or reach out to us and we can get you registered. Also, the district secretary, Shirley Penix Evans, will go ahead and let you register. She's not going to cut it off. So anybody that wants to go should go.
Trudy, can I just interject? That facility, the Texas Freshwater
Fish hatcheries?
Yes, it is just interesting. It's worth going to see that place.
It is. It's going to be a fun time. It's going to be a fun time. So please go if you have any desire to go whatsoever. We're going to all be there. All the cool kids are going to be there. So you need to go. All right. East Texas Philanthropy Day is November the 13th, 2023. The Hibbs Family Foundation is going to be honored at that luncheon. As you know, Billy Hibbs Jr. is one of our proud Rotary members here at this club, and we do have a table. The board members have already gotten a table. If you want to go, please let us know about that. And I'm not sure how much, what we'll do if we have enough people who are interested. We'll see if we can put together another table. Do we have one table or two tables?
We just have one.
We just have the one table and all of those seats are taken. I've already been, okay, so if you want to go, we want to know that. So please let us know if you want to go. I think it would be great to have a big show.
Because I think that individual tickets are $60.
Individual tickets are $60.
We sponsored a table.
Okay, so that way, if you get 10 people, you and 9 of your best friends, and you can have a table together, okay? And then that way, we want to really show our support for him. October 19th is going to be our vocational visit to Champions for Children. Okay, box lunches are going to be from Nukes this time. You should be getting an email from Holly, so go ahead and let Holly know what you want, and then it's $20 a box lunch, is that right? But we won't be meeting here because what week is that? Rose Festival. We can't compete with that, but we want to be a Champions for Children. And speaking of Champions for Children, Andrea Horton put a couple of things on everybody's table. Would you like to explain what those are?
Absolutely. So first of all, just regarding the vocational visit, I have 5 professional counselors who work on my staff, and so they are putting together an amazing presentation on youth and adolescent mental health. So it'll be a great opportunity to get just some feedback about what's going on with youth and adolescent mental health in our schools, in our community. So invite anyone who might be interested in hearing that presentation as well. But we have 2 events that I think that you guys might be interested in. First of all, on the 17th, we are going to be having a Texas tour with children at risk. So there's a big proposition on the ballot related to childcare, which is one of the areas that we've really focused our services on, is working in creating high quality childcare. But there's so much else going on in the area of early childhood education. And so on the 10th, we'll be doing a proclamation at Commissioner's Court, and then on the 17th, we'll be doing that event with a press conference at 10 and a presentation at 10:30 at the Women's Building. But then thank you to the Rotary for sponsoring the Breakfast for Champions, and you guys sponsored our Champion for Mental Health, which is what we're And so we kind of tried a little bit here, but we would love for you to come. It's on November the 2nd, Thursday morning. It's free to attend. Not necessarily, I'm not going to ask you for money because that is what I do. Just so you know, we are going to honor 5 amazing individuals and organizations who are working every day in the area of early childhood, working with our kids, working with our families, and making sure that Tyler's a great place to grow up. And so I'd love for you to attend either of those events. There's QR codes. You can register or just tell me, and I will get you signed up.
All right. Thanks, Andrea. There are QR codes on those if you want more information about that. Okay, so October 12th, that program is going to be Trent Goodwin with Camp V. We are all very, very familiar with Camp V. We love Camp V. We're very supportive of Camp V, so we cannot wait for that. Okay, and I would like to welcome up to the podium our very own Annie Dwyer. She is going to introduce our speaker today that we are so happy to have in person. I know you guys have questions. So what I told him was that I want everybody to narrow it down to your top 10 questions per person. Okay? All right.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be introducing the Congressman. I not only consider him to be a friend, but he is one of the hardest working, if not the hardest working member of Congress. When he's in the counties of Congressional District 1, meeting with business owners, community organizations, business and more. The man is always working. So much so that last week I had a conversation with Chelsea Cohen in which I expressed my concern about burnout and asked if she could schedule some downtime. And her response was, well, I do schedule downtime, but when he sees a break in the schedule, he puts something else in there. So burnout is a real thing. So this time I get to do, last time I introduced him, it took about 5 minutes. I have the short bio this time. So Nathaniel Moran attended White House ISD, then attended the United States Military Academy at West Point for 2 years before transferring to Texas Tech, where he ultimately earned a BA in Russian language and area studies, an MBA, and a law degree. He's always been a slacker. After finishing school, he practiced civil law with a primary focus on business and commercial litigation and transaction work. In 2016, Nathaniel was appointed as a Smith County judge, and in 2018, he was elected to a full 4-year term as county judge, and he continued in that role until he was elected to Congress in November 2022. As a member of Congress in the House of Representatives, he serves on 3 committees: Foreign Affairs, Education and the Workforce, and Judiciary. He also serves on 7 subcommittees. Aside from work, Congressman Moran and his wife Keena have 4 children, and the family is actively involved in their church, schools, and the community in Tyler. Please give a warm welcome to Congressman Nathaniel Moran.
And it's so good to be here with each one of you today. As you can tell, I'm a little off today. I've got this really, really bad head cold, but I was going through my mind what it would seem like if I called and said, I'm sick, I can't come. I think about half of you would be like, nah, he's not sick. He's not really sick. And truth be told, there's no sick days in Congress. There's work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done. And one of the most important things that I can do is be with you guys today to answer questions. That's why I'm not going to shake your hand though, because I don't want you to get sick. But the truth is there's some really meaningful and historic things going on right now in Washington, D.C. And a lot of what you're seeing in the media, the national media, is not really the full story. And you deserve the full story. So I want to give you what I perceive to be a lot of the full story about what's going on in D.C. I'm not going to talk very long because I want to take your questions. But the things that have happened here in this last week with McCarthy's removal and days before that, the clean CR, as it were, that got passed on Saturday to fund the government for another 45 days. Those 2 big events are really the 2 events that I want to talk about in the last 3 or 4 months leading up to that and how we got to that point, because those 2 interplay quite a bit. And then I want to take your questions specifically about how that's going to play out. So let's talk about the appropriations process. So the appropriations process is really the most important thing the House of Representatives can do. We hold the power of the purse. All of the appropriations bills have to originate with the House. And so our job is to get 12 different appropriations bills passed and over to the Senate, and then conference, and then figure out how to move forward with funding the government before September 30th. That's the end of the fiscal year. Since 1977, only 4 times has Congress passed all 12 appropriations bills, or the House passed all 12 appropriations bills. Think about that. 46 years, only 4 times has it happened. So how close were we this year? Well, before the September deadline, we had passed 4. We passed MILCON VA, which is military construction and veterans. We passed Department of Defense. We had passed Homeland Security, and we had passed what's called State and Foreign Ops. That's really the State Department and our foreign operations abroad. So 4 of the 12 bills had been passed. We'd only passed 1 and that was Milcon VA before the August recess. We were having a good discussion, Robert and I were, about this in particular circumstance, because when you look at the calendar and the days that we had to work, we only had about 12 or 14 working days in September when we came back. So my question, and a lot of question of Congressmen and women before we left for the August recess, which by the way is not a recess. We were working hard during August. It's just a district work period. Was, why are we going home? Why are we not staying here? Because there's no way in this world that we're going to get all of those 12 bills done or the 11 remaining bills done when we come back in September. And there's really not a good answer. I'm going to tell you, part of it is because, pardon me, no excuses here. The reasons behind that is, quite frankly, I think the House is used to pushing it up to the September 30th deadline and then trying to deal in those emergency situations. Not very much gets done in DC unless there's pressure or there's an emergency. And that is kind of the historic truth of it. That's unfortunate because there's a lot of us in the House that said at the beginning of the year, we want to pass all those 12 bills. So that was one of the building frustrations among a pretty large group of the delegation as to why are we not getting these bills passed. Now, part of it is that we're not getting passed is because we have a very slim majority. You know, we have really a 4-seat majority that's now a 3-seat majority because Chris Stewart from Utah resigned because his wife had cancer, so she's gone. So now we're down to like 221 Republicans. We have to have 218 to pass anything. So think about how hard it would be to get bills like this that have only been passed 4 times in the last 45 years, passed with 3-seat majority. So any 4 members together that said, we don't like that, they can hold up the bill. And that's what actually was happening. In July, there were a couple of appropriations bills that were scheduled to be voted. They got pulled from the schedule. Why? Because we didn't have the votes. And at that point, the leadership wasn't willing to put them on the floor for them to fail. Now, when we got to September, that was not the case. In fact, we put a bill on the floor that didn't pass. I mentioned the 4 that did pass. The 5th one that was on the floor that didn't pass is our ag appropriations that didn't pass. That's different than the farm bill, which will come up later. But I want to tell you this about the ag bill because this illustrates how difficult, no matter who's in charge of the House of Representatives, no matter who the speaker is, how difficult this is going to be over the next 45 days and maybe longer to get 12 appropriations bills passed. Because our ag bill failed with 27 Republicans voting against it. And it wasn't the typical Republicans that are on the negative side of voting for things that happened. It was actually Midwestern farming community Republicans. And they said, look, we understand we need to make cuts, but the cuts that have been made to the ag bill go way too deep for our communities. And we are in farming communities, and they don't want us to vote for this bill. And quite frankly, I can understand that because all of us right here, we have a perspective from East Texas about what should happen. And your voice matters to me, and I'm supposed to be your vote in DC. So if there's an issue that comes up that is really important to East Texans, even if 434 other people in Congress say, I like that. If you guys say, I don't like it, it doesn't work for East Texas, I say no. That's the way it works. So these representatives were actually responding to their constituents that elected them that said, it's too deep, the cuts are too deep for our farming communities, we can't do that. Well, that's gonna play out in some very interesting ways because I can tell you on the House floor when that failed, here's what I heard. I heard members of the Freedom Caucus that said, well, if they're not gonna pass the ag bill, then we're not gonna help them pass the farm bill because they wanted the ag bill passed at the low cuts in exchange for support for the farm bill that's going to come later, which typically is not an easy thing for conservatives to vote for. So now you see the dynamic playing internally in the Republican conference where there's not a whole lot of movement. You've got to find the sweet spot of where the 218 is. And if you don't, then you don't get the bills passed. So that frustration was mounting in July and in August and in September when we got back. And frankly, I was frustrated too with the calendar schedule. And I stood up in our conference at some point and said, look, I think what we ought to do is shut down every other point of business that's going on in Congress. And we need to stay here day after day after day after day until those 12 bills are passed. That's what we should be doing. And this was weeks in advance of the deadline. Because at that point, we still had time if we would stay and do the work. Well, there just wasn't the appetite for that. And that's unfortunate. And frankly, I've suggested that we get into kind of almost a quasi-mediation scenario where we're dealing with the different factions. And we just simply stay until we work out all 12 bills. Because each bill, even though it's individual, people wanted to know what's the aggregate top line number that we're going to spend. And that was a good question because nobody was being told that. And nobody wanted to get to the end and find out that the aggregate was going to be a lot bigger than what we wanted. We wanted to know what's the aggregate of all these 12 bills. So even though we weren't doing an omnibus, the bills played against each other. And we needed to know if we're cutting in this area, are we building in this area? Are we staying consistent? What are we going to end up with? Are we going to end up with a top line of 1.471 trillion for non-defense, non-veterans discretionary spending? Is it going to be 1.526? Is it going to be 1.586? That was the numbers that were really the numbers that were in argument. So some wanted 1.471, some wanted the which was the limits and grow number, some wanted the Fiscal Responsibility Act number, which is 1.586. Some wanted to split the difference at 1.526. But truthfully, between all of us in this room, it wouldn't have mattered. None of that would have mattered. If we were 1.471, 1.586, whatever we got out of the House still had to go to conference with the Senate. We needed to get something out of the House. There's no way we can negotiate with nothing. And so that was really important, was to try to get something out of the House. And the other thing that puts it in perspective is how much we borrowed each year, about $2 trillion. So think about all I just said. If you add in the defense and the VA, about every penny that we spend on all the discretionary 12 bills that we're talking about, it's all borrowed money, every cent of it. So it doesn't, even if we reduce it by 100 billion, we're not really affecting the long-term trajectory of our nation's economy. Our problem is the 70% of our economy that's tied up in mandatory, non-discretionary spending. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Nobody wants to talk about that. Why? Because there's a lot of us that are connected to that. But if we don't do anything about that, what's going to happen in 10 years? It's going to fail. I mean, it's just a mathematical certainty that it's going to fail. And every year then, we're borrowing money actually to do the things that we have discretionary decision over. Every cent that's borrowed. We can't live like that. So there's a lot of things we need to do to get that wrapped up. So I said at some point, look, we're arguing over pennies on the dollar. And we were arguing internally about pennies on the dollar. We need to pass those bills and get those to the Senate so we can actually get some resolution. Let me answer the question about a shutdown. So do we want to shut down? Do we not want to shut down? I have a lot of people call and say, shut the government down. I'm just going to tell you, I don't fall in the bucket of a person that wants to shut the government down. I'm not afraid of it shutting down, but I don't want it because it doesn't save us any money. It saves us no money to shut the government down. In fact, it costs us money. It costs us billions of dollars to shut the government down. And if you go back over the last 3 shutdowns and see what policy initiatives we were holding fast to try to negotiate in the shutdown, not one time did we get any of the policy initiatives we wanted. Not one time. So you lose negotiating leverage. You pay people to go home for several weeks. When they come back, they get their back pay, but they haven't been doing work for several weeks. That's not a way to run the government. And in the meantime, the executive branch gets to determine who is essential and who's not. And I was struck by this conversation with Ryan Zinke, who is the former Secretary of the Interior. He was the Secretary of the Interior for President Trump. Before that, he was in Congress, and now he's back in Congress. And he stood up in our conference, he said, listen, when I was the Secretary of the Interior and the government shut down, I had a lot of authority to determine who was essential and who wasn't, and what was shut down and what wasn't. He said, I determined that we were still gonna do permitting for oil and gas stuff. I determined we were gonna keep our federal lands open. I determined that we were gonna be doing all those conservative things we wanna see happen. But he said the current Secretary of Interior, not gonna wanna do that. They're gonna shut down oil and gas permitting. They're gonna shut down inspections. They're gonna shut down, aspects of the FAA that reduce the number of flights and clog up our airways and delay stuff. They're gonna shut down the things in conservative districts that make you and me feel a lot of pain. And at the end of the day, we still gotta solve the same problems with the same people and the same disagreements on issues, right? It doesn't change, it just kicks it down the can down the road. So what we need to do is, and I think we're gonna probably do a better job of this next year, hopefully. But people gotta realize we just ultimately have to pass those bills out. We gotta find a way to get to 218 to pass those bills out. Whether or not that's gonna happen in the next 40 days, actually, I don't think so. I'm just gonna tell you, I don't think so. Now, let me tell you what happened leading up to the clean CR, because this is really important too. Because as we got closer to the deadline, it looked like we were not gonna get the 12 bills passed. And by the way, the 4 bills that we did pass, that's 70% of the discretionary budget of the 12. So the other bills that we have left are really minor comparatively to the 4 bills we did pass. And they're sitting in the Senate, and nobody talks about that. The Senate hasn't picked them up, hasn't done anything with them. We're trying to get them to conference with us and try to actually move those items forward. But when it became apparent that we weren't gonna get all those 12 bills passed, then the key was, all right, what can we do at this point of leverage to try to get some things policy-wise that we want long-term? Number one for me is border security. So Chip Roy, Scott Perry, guys from the Freedom Caucus, really good individuals, came together with folks from Main Street Caucus, and outside of leadership, McCarthy was completely out of this. They left him out of this. They reached an agreement that said, let's try to do a short-term spending bill that reduces spending in these non-defense, non-VA areas by 30%, 45 days or 30 days, and let's attach border security policy to it so that it forces the Democrats to have to take up border security, which they want to do. They don't want to say that, but they do want to do it. And then it starts a commission. It actually has a commission in there that's built to look at Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, those mandatory items. And that commission would be kind of like be 3 members of the House from Democrats, 3 members of the House Republicans, 3 Senate Republicans, and 3 Senate Democrats, and a few others. And they would come back in a year or so, or 6 months or 8 months, and say, here's a proposal to deal with those mandatory spending items, and then have us vote it up or down. No amendments, just kind of like a BRAC commission. Take the politics out of it more so than it presently is. So that's some really good items in there, because it had all those really strong HR2 border security policies that we wanted. And it reduced spending, and it was not a continuing resolution, because a continuing resolution continues last year's spending levels. So it was a good deal. Is that right? Yeah, last Friday. I thought it was really good because it leveraged and it would have put the president and the Senate behind to try to get them to agree to long-term border policies. Since that didn't happen, then on Saturday, what happened was we passed a clean CR. Now, I voted against the clean CR because it didn't do any of the other stuff. It kept spending at the high level. It didn't include border security. It didn't do anything else. But truth be told, it was the best of the remaining options. The other option, if that hadn't passed, was what was coming from the Senate, because the Senate was not going to let a shutdown happen either. So if you watched on Saturday, it was kind of unique drama. We have this CR that was on the House floor about noon. The Senate's debating a CR that they have over on their side at the same time. But because of the rules that governing each body, one was trying to outlast the other, see who could get there first. So the House Democrats were trying to delay our bill, which just was clean CR plus emergency funding for our domestic needs, over to the Senate. The Senate was trying to pass its bill, which had a bunch of Ukraine funding and a bunch of other with the clean CR over. because whichever one got the other one's bill to the other body first was gonna win, basically. If the Senate got theirs to us first, then the House Democrats and the some group of Republicans would have voted for it, it would have passed, because they didn't want it shut down. If we got ours to theirs first, then it was gonna pass, because nobody wanted to be responsible for the shutdown. So the Senate Republicans internally were trying to figure out, are we gonna stand and vote against cloture, which closes the debate, or are we gonna let it go forward on the floor of the Senate? Luckily, they stood firm and said they were not going to allow for cloture to happen. On our side, Jeffries was using what's called the magic minute. He was trying to filibuster and speak as long as he could so that the Senate bill would pass. Because the Democrats didn't want to vote for the clean CR that was coming through the House. But when Jeffries realized that the Republicans were not going to let cloture happen, he knew he couldn't outlast it, because then it was going to be like 30 hours before they could get that bill to us. He couldn't stand there and talk for 30 hours. So he knew the jig was up, so he resigned himself to just walk off and let that vote happen, which he did. And then that's what happened, getting it over to the Senate before midnight and getting it signed into law. So that's a little bit about how it went on behind the scenes. That's what led partially to McCarthy coming out. But I will tell you, leading up to that Friday vote, remember I told you I voted for a bill on Friday that had border security in it, a lot of short-term spending cuts, that commission. There were people that were opposing that Friday bill because they wanted to force McCarthy to push that clean CR on Friday for the express purpose of then trying to oust him this week. That was the only reason they opposed it. And so, in my opinion, that's not driven by policy. It's driven by personality. It's driven by personal vendettas. I didn't like that. Even though I voted against that bill, and McCarthy he's made some mistakes this year. There's no question about it. But what we saw this week in his removal is really destructive to what right now, trying to do what we have to do in the middle of this process. Because we only have 45 days to focus on appropriations and border security. So whether or not you like McCarthy or not, whether or not you think he should be out or not, it really is, that wasn't the question. The question is, was now the time to do this? This was such a horrible time to do this. Why would you do this in the middle of a time where we need to be focused together, uniformly together, passing these 12 appropriations bills? We're going to have at least a 2-week delay, maybe longer. It may take us longer to figure out who the speaker is. And once we figure out who the new speaker is going to be, then you got to shuffle into all kinds of other staff members and all other, it depends. I mean, right now it's Kevin Hearn or Jim Jordan or Steve Scalise. Well, if Jim Jordan gets it, well, now you got to find a new Judiciary Committee chairman. And look at all the work that he's been doing on Judiciary Committee. He heads up 2 of the most powerful committees right now. So everything in the House comes to a halt right now. Everything. We can't do any business. And in my opinion, it's kind of like in battle. I mean, in the middle of a surge in battle, replacing your general and having to tell everybody to stop on their advance and say, whoa, stop. And in the middle of that, the enemy is regrouping and we're not getting anything done. It may not have been a perfect advance, and quite clearly it was not. I can tell you it wasn't. I've got some complaints about it. But the worst thing we could have done was what happened this week, where now we're not doing any business and nothing's happening. If you need to be out, let's wait till these 45 days are over. Wait till it's all over. Okay, then let's deal with it. But in the middle of this process, to not be focused on policy, I think is a mistake. So that's my opinion about what happened this week. That's why I voted not to remove him this week. I thought it was just the wrong move for our conference. And now what's happened is, remember we talked about 221, three-seat majority? Now we've got a lot of people in that conference that are really angry at each other. You guys know me. I'm a steady kind of dispassionate person. I don't get caught up in anger. It doesn't do any good for anybody. I just want to get on to the next thing and figure out what the solution is. So that's what I'm going to try to do. But there are some people in our conference that are really angry at each other. And I'm not sure how that's going to play out next week. I'm really glad that there's at least a couple days break here where my phone's blown up of people that are running for the new positions. And if new positions get filled by other people, then other people are running for their positions. So I'm getting tons of calls from other congressmen saying, hey, I'm gonna run for this, run for that. So we've got to basically start from scratch on all of that. When in the meantime, I'd rather than do appropriations. So that's where we're at. What questions do you guys have? That was a lot longer, Paul.
Contrast the stated objection to the speaker by Matt Gates to the actual objection to the speaker.
Yeah. So, the stated objection, when you heard the argument, and Matt is a brilliant guy. He's a smart guy, great orator. But the stated objection is stuff that a lot of us agree with generally, but it can't be laid at the feet of Kevin. I mean, the $33 trillion debt is not laid at the feet of Kevin McCarthy. The fact that we didn't get all 12 appropriations bills, like I said, we got further along than most Congresses had in years. State foreign ops, first time it's been passed since 2006. So we have been making some progress, but a lot of what he said was like the pot calling the kettle black. And I know he made some statements about Kevin didn't fulfill certain promises along the way. I can tell you there's a lot of that goes around, that has gone around with all the people involved. And there was a great Politico story about a week or so ago that went back into the history of Matt Gaetz personally and Kevin McCarthy and talked about the personal feud. And in my estimation, I try not to ascribe too much motive to it, but in my estimation, this was personally driven. It wasn't policy driven. Because the policies that we're trying to get after, there's an honest disagreement among the factions of the Republicans themselves. We are not every one of us is not the same shade of red. And we've got some people that were elected in a Biden plus 16 district in our conference. What does that mean? That means Biden won that district by 16 points. And we have a Republican congressperson that won in that district. The person's not going to be the same shade of red as me. They're not going to see things the same way. So whoever becomes the next speaker is going to still deal with that same dynamic. They're still going to have to pull the right and the left together in our party to do that. So the stated objections, I think, were just illusory. I think it was really personal. And I think that the lead up, as I watched it, to the shutdown, the potential shutdown and what happened, was all a setup to make that happen.
Well, it doesn't allowing one member to call for a motion to vacate the chair and invite chaos.
It does, although I don't know that I have a problem with the rule itself, because that rule has been in place for a long time before Nancy Pelosi got there. One member could always do that. It's just we had a little bit more prudence and self-control as members about what happened. The rule that we started out with before we got to January was 5 members could do that. And you saw in the vote this last week, even if it was 5 members, they probably would have had 5 members. So then the question becomes, well, what is it? Is it a majority in the conference that can call for the removal of speaker? Well, I think the traditions of the congressional rules were generally one member can always call for that, but we generally showed professional restraint, and we're losing a lot of that in Congress, and that's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate. But you're going to hear a lot about rules changes probably coming up, because as we elect the new speaker, there's a lot of people that are saying we want to change that rule and other rules so that we can function without dysfunction the last 15 months of our time together. We have to. Yes, sir.
How much power does the former Speaker Nancy Pelosi still have in the Democratic Congress?
I think she still has a pretty good grip on things. But Jeffries has become very popular very quickly with his caucus, and he's very well liked, and he's asserted himself in such a way that I think that she's beginning to take a more and more backseat role, because she sees he's able to do that. But she works on his behalf quite frequently. Yeah. Yeah, and by the way, she got kicked out of her office right after. You guys saw that. I wouldn't think too much of that, by the way. I don't think that was, somebody, I heard a news report say that was vitriolic in response to her not supporting Kevin on this. And I will tell you, here's a couple of things behind the scenes you didn't know. The Democrats had offered to make a deal with Kevin to keep him the speaker. And Kevin said, no, I'm not going to take a deal. I mean, my conference is either going to keep me in or not. So Kevin had that opportunity. Kevin did not seek their support on this clean CR. I can tell you that. He was in the room with the Texas delegation when they were meeting as a caucus. And he was talking to us about things that were going on while that caucus was meeting, trying to figure out what they were going to do, whether or not they were going to support or not support that clean CR. So he made no deal on the clean CR with them, and he refused to take a deal with them to keep his seat. So anybody that would say that he would do anything to keep his seat, he did not. He could have, and he didn't. Yes, ma'am.
What is your view of the damage this has done to the Republican Party for the elections in 2024?
It's more continued division where I think as Republicans, our biggest problem is we believe every Republican has to be monochromatic. This goes back to my view of every district is different and we're different shades of red. So we spend so much time shooting at each other that we can't see the policy enemy that's out there, and we can't focus our efforts because we would agree on 90 or 95% of the stuff as a conference. But we're so focused on the 5% of the stuff. And the other thing, back to what Paul asked about the motivation behind some of what happened this last week, I'd be really interested to see how much money Matt Gaetz raised during the last 2 weeks. Because I can tell you, my colleagues, some of them were getting, somehow they were on the distribution list. They were getting the text messages from his campaign saying, give us money because we're fighting against the squish Republicans. Well, I mean, and that was happening by more than just him of that 8. And look at the dynamic too of, there's 4 or 5 of those guys that are running for other office too. So we got, he's been mentioned as somebody that wants to run for governor of Florida. And I think that's probably true. We got somebody that wants to run for state senator in their state. We got somebody that wants to run for state attorney general in their state. Among the ones that are, in my opinion, speaking unreasonably in some areas, but they're doing so because it helps their fundraising. And it helps their getting propped up for that next move. And that's a real shame. Yes, sir.
Dan, thank you for being here today, even with the cold. I appreciate you being here. So the question is, those of us with gray hair in the room remember the Democrats of the 60s and 70s fighting amongst themselves all the time. And they pretty much are now lockstep together. What have they done differently? What has caused them to be more unified in appearance than Republicans have been?
Some of it, well, I don't want to be too hard because I'm trying not to be too partisan here. But some of it, honestly, is because the Democratic Party, I think, today has gotten to the point where the coalescing factor is, if you'll support my agenda, I'll support your agenda. Our agendas can be different, but you support me and I'll support you. And that's the coalescing factor. In the Republican Party, we're still trying to find principled way forward, and there's principled disagreement, but there's got to be a room for reasonable variances of disagreement within a policy decision. But everybody easily will say, well, I'm standing on principle, and I'm standing on principle, and I'm standing on principle. And when everybody claims to stand on principle, when most of the time it's just practical, then we can't get anything done. So,
How optimistic are you of getting a speaker next Wednesday?
I don't think it'll be next Wednesday. I think it'll take most of the week next week. And what I'm hearing is that we're not going to come out and do 15 rounds like we did in January. That we're going to make sure we have 218. This is what I'm hearing secondhand. Well, actually, firsthand, I guess. We're going to make sure we have 218 in the room, in the conference, before we go to the floor with the nominee, because we don't want to have to go through 15 more rounds of that.
I'll make this real quick. It's kind of a follow-up. to the question that George asked earlier. I viewed an interview the other day between Tucker Carlson and the noted historian Victor David Hanson. And Professor Hanson pointed out a fact that really made sense to me. He said back in the days of people like Harry Truman, Hubert Humphrey, George McGovern, those guys, they respected the Constitution and the rule of law. And he made the point, he said, today, the Democrats have no respect. Not all of them, but too many of them don't respect that. What they want is results. And they're going to do what they need to do to get them. And he says the Republicans need to wake up and face that fact. Could I get your opinion on that?
I don't know that I would go that far, because I've met and gotten to know some of the Democrats. There's just an honest disagreement on some. Now, some, yes, but I would say the same, frankly. I think the motivation of some on both sides of the aisle is the wrong motivation. It's all personal, it's all power, it's all position. It's not about policy or principle. It's not. And people are really good on TV to make you think it's about policy and principle, but it is not. There is a lot of personal stuff behind the scenes that's going on, and a lot of maneuvering for position and power. So be leery of anybody on either side that claims to have that principled high horse. Thank you guys for letting me be here.
Thank you so much. And do you have any time afterwards in case somebody has some questions? Okay, yeah, because I know that you guys have a lot of questions and we knew that was going to happen. So thank you for being able to take all of those. So if you have another burning question, please see him for a few minutes afterwards. And thank you for being here even with the cold. That's awesome. Okay, so we have the Ace of Diamonds. This raffle has lived through a lot of meetings. So we're gonna let the congressman draw the halfway winning ticket. Remember, if you're visiting, if you're a Rotary member of our club, half goes to you, half goes to the club. Before anyone bought any tickets today, it was at $2,500. So add the tickets that we bought in today, and it's sitting at
$25.90.
$25.90. Okay, so the last four digits.
1132.
Nope.
1132.
Keep going down. It's the way the world was printed.
No one has 1132.
I'll take it if nobody has it.
Okay, you have draw again. Draw
No, it
until
might
you
be
get
Jim.
Wait, we found it.
Kim, did you have a ticket? We were checking our tickets.
Oh, okay.
You want?
1145.
Goodness.
Okay, Captain.
All right, you're halfway there. Verify the numbers, please.
You want
All right, Kathy, we're ready for you.
Okay, and I
Okay,
don't know how
Cap.
many cards are on the table. She has to pull the Ace of Diamonds.
12.
There's 12 cards, 1 in 12 chance. Let's see if you can do it.
Oh.
Oh, no, no ace this time. So the Ace of Diamonds raffle will live to see another week. Please stand with me as we recite the 4-way test of the things that we think, say, or do first.
Is it the truth?
Second.
Is it fair to all concerned?
Third.
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
And fourth.
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
We are adjourned. Have a great day.